The territory of the Cocos Islands, also called Cocos Islands and Keeling Islands, is a territory of Australia, located in the Indian Ocean, southwest of Christmas Island and approximately midway between Australia and Sri Lanka. The territory consists of 2 atolls and 27 coral islands, of which 2, West Island and Home Island, are inhabited with a total population of approximately 600. Name. The islands have been called the Cocos Islands, the Keeling Islands, the Cocos Keeling Islands and the Keeling Cocos Islands. Cocos refers to the abundant coconut trees, while Keeling is William Keeling, reputedly the first European to sight the islands. In 1609, John Clunies Ross, who sailed there in the Borneo in 1825, called the group the Borneo Coral Isles, restricting Keeling to North Keeling, and calling South Keeling the Cocos Properly. The form Cocos Islands, attested from 1916, was made official by the Cocos Islands Act 1955. Geography. The Cocos Islands consist of 2 flat, low-lying coral atolls with an area of 14.2 square kilometers, 26 kilometers of coastline, a highest elevation of 5 meters and thickly covered with coconut palms and other vegetation. The climate is pleasant, moderated by the southeast trade winds for about 9 months of the year and with moderate rainfall. Tropical cyclones may occur in the early months of the year. North Keeling Island is an atoll consisting of just one C-shaped island, a nearly closed atoll ring with a small opening into the lagoon, about 50 meters wide, on the east side. The island measures 1.1 square kilometers in land area and is uninhabited. The lagoon is about 0.5 square kilometers. North Keeling Island and the surrounding sea to 1.5 kilometers from shore form the Pulu Keeling National Park, established on the 12th of December 1995. It is home to the only surviving population of the endemic and endangered Cocos buff-banded rail. South Keeling Islands is an atoll consisting of 24 individual islets forming an incomplete atoll ring, with a total land area of 13.1 square kilometers. Only Home Island and West Island are populated. The Cocos Malays maintain weekend shacks, referred to as pondoks, on most of the larger islands. There are no rivers or lakes on either atoll. Freshwater resources are limited to water lenses on the larger islands, underground accumulations of rainwater lying above the seawater. These lenses are accessed through shallow bores or wells. Flora and fauna. Climate. Cocos Islands experiences tropical monsoon climate according to Köppen climate classification, as the archipelago lies approximately in the midway between the equator and the Tropic of Capricorn. The archipelago has 2 distinct precipitation totals between the wet season and the dry season. The wettest month is April with precipitation total 250.0 mm, while the driest month is October with precipitation total 50.9 mm. The temperature varies a little as its location away from the equator. The hottest month is March with average high temperature 29.8 degrees Celsius, while the coolest month is August with average low temperature 23.6 degrees Celsius. Demographics. In 2010, the population of the islands is estimated at just over 600. The population on the 2 inhabited islands generally is split between the ethnic Europeans on West Island and the ethnic Malays on Home Island. A Cocos dialect of Malay and English are the main languages spoken, and 80% of Cocos Islanders are Sunni Muslim. The other 20% are of another religion. History. In 1609, Captain William Keeling was the first European to see the islands, while serving in the East India Company. but they remained uninhabited until the 19th century. In 1814, Scottish merchant seaman Captain John Clunies Ross stopped briefly at the islands on a trip to India, nailing up a Union Jack and planning to return and settle on the islands with his family in the future. Wealthy Englishman Alexander Hare had similar plans, and hired a captain, coincidentally, Clunies Ross' brother, to bring him and a harem of 40 Malay women to the islands, where he hoped to establish his private residence. Hare had previously served as resident of Banjarmasin, a town in Borneo, and found that he could not confine himself to the tame life that prosy civilization affords. Clunies Ross returned 2 years later with his wife, children and mother-in-law, and found Hare already established on the island and living with a private harem. A feud grew between the two. Clunies Ross' 8 sailors began at once the invasion of the new kingdom to take possession of it, women and all. After some time, Hare's women began deserting him, and instead finding themselves mates amongst Clunies Ross' sailors. Disheartened, Hare left the island. He died in Bencoolen in 1834. Clunies Ross' workers were paid in a currency called the Cocos rupee, a currency John Clunies Ross minted himself that could only be redeemed at the company store. On the 1st of April 1836, HMS Beagle under Captain Robert Fitzroy arrived to take soundings to establish the profile of the atoll as part of the survey expedition of the Beagle. To the naturalist Charles Darwin, aboard the ship, the results supported a theory he had developed of how atolls formed, which he later published as The Structure and Distribution of Coral Reefs. He studied the natural history of the islands and collected specimens. Darwin's assistant Sims Covington noted that an Englishman and his family, with about 60 or 70 mulattoes from the Cape of Good Hope, live on one of the islands. Captain Ross, the governor, is now absent at the Cape. Annexation by the British Empire. The islands were annexed by the British Empire in 1857. This annexation was carried out by Captain Stephen Grenville Fremantle in command of HMS Juno. Fremantle claimed the islands for the British Empire and appointed Ross II as superintendent. In 1886, their administration was placed under the Straits Settlements, which included Penang, Malacca and Singapore. Queen Victoria granted the islands in perpetuity to the Clunies Ross family in 1886. The Cocos Islands under the Clunies Ross family have been cited as an example of a 19th-century micronation. In 1901, a telegraph cable station was established on Direction Island. Undersea cables went to Rodrigues, Mauritius, Batavia, Java and Fremantle, Western Australia. In 1910, a wireless station was established to communicate with passing ships. The cable station ceased operation in 1966. World War I. On the morning of the 9th of November 1914, the islands became the site of the Battle of Cocos, one of the first naval battles of World War I. A landing party from the German cruiser SMS Emden captured and disabled the wireless and cable communications station on Direction Island, but not before the station was able to transmit a distress call. An Allied troop convoy was passing nearby, and the Australian cruiser HMAS Sydney was detached from the convoy escort to investigate. Sydney spotted the island and Emden at 9:15, with both ships preparing for combat. At 11:20, the heavily damaged Emden beached herself on North Keeling Island. The Australian warship broke to pursue Emden's supporting collier, which scuttled herself, then returned to North Keeling Island at 1600. At this point, Emden's battle ensign was still flying, usually a sign that a ship intends to continue fighting. After no response to instructions to lower the ensign, 2 salvos were shot into the beached cruiser, after which the Germans lowered the flag and raised a white sheet. Sydney had orders to ascertain the status of the transmission station, but returned the next day to provide medical assistance to the Germans. 134 personnel aboard Emden were killed, and 69 were wounded, compared to 4 killed and 16 wounded aboard Sydney. The German survivors were taken aboard the Australian cruiser, which caught up to the troop convoy in Colombo on the 15th of November, then transported to Malta and handed over the prisoners to the British Army. An additional 50 German personnel from the shore party, unable to be recovered before Sydney arrived, commandeered a schooner and escaped from Direction Island, eventually arriving in Constantinople. Emden was the last active Central Powers warship in the Indian Pacific Ocean, which meant troopships from Australia and New Zealand could sail without naval escort, and Allied ships could be deployed elsewhere. World War II. During World War II, the cable station was once again a vital link. The Cocos were valuable for direction finding by the Y service, the worldwide intelligence system used during the war. Allied planners noted that the islands might be seized as an airfield for German planes and as a base for commerce raiders operating in the Indian Ocean. Following Japan's entry into the war, Japanese forces occupied neighboring islands. To avoid drawing their attention to the Cocos cable station and its islands garrison, the seaplane anchorage between Direction and Horsburgh Islands was not used. Radio transmitters were also kept silent, except in emergencies. After the fall of Singapore in 1942, the islands were administered from Ceylon, and Western Direction Islands were placed under Allied military administration. The island's garrison initially consisted of a platoon from the British Army's King's African Rifles, located on Horsburgh Island, with 2 6-inch guns to cover the anchorage. The local inhabitants all lived on Home Island. Despite the importance of the islands as a communication center, the Japanese made no attempt either to raid or to occupy them and contented themselves with sending over a reconnaissance aircraft about once a month. On the night of 8 to 9 May 1942, 15 members of the garrison from the Ceylon Defense Force mutinied under the leadership of Gratian Fernando. The mutineers were said to have been provoked by the attitude of the British officers and were also supposedly inspired by anti-imperialist beliefs. They attempted to take control of the gun battery on the islands. The Cocos Islands mutiny was crushed, but the mutineers killed 1 non-mutinous soldier and wounded 1 officer. 7 of the mutineers were sentenced to death at a trial that was later alleged to have been improperly conducted. 4 of the sentences were commuted, but 3 men were executed, including Fernando. These were to be the only British Commonwealth soldiers executed for mutiny during the Second World War. On the 25th of December 1942, the Japanese submarine I-166 bombarded the islands but caused no damage. Later in the war, 2 airstrips were built, and 3 bomber squadrons were moved to the islands to conduct raids against Japanese targets in Southeast Asia and to provide support during the planned reinvasion of Malaya and reconquest of Singapore. The first aircraft to arrive were Supermarine Spitfire MKVIIs of No. 136 Squadron RAF. They included some Liberator bombers from No. 321 Squadron RAF, which were also stationed on the islands. When in July 1945 No. 99 and No. 356 RAF squadrons arrived on West Island. They brought with them a daily newspaper called The Atoll, which contained news of what was happening in the outside world. Run by airmen in their off-duty hours, it achieved fame when dropped by Liberator bombers on POW camps over the heads of the Japanese guards. In 1946, the administration of the islands reverted to Singapore and it became part of the colony of Singapore. Transfer to Australia. On the 23rd of November 1955, the islands were transferred to Australian control under the Cocos Islands Act 1955 pursuant to the Cocos Islands Act 1955. H. J. Hull was appointed the first official representative of the new territory. He had been a lieutenant commander in the Royal Australian Navy and was released for the purpose. Under Commonwealth Cabinet Decision 1573 of 9 September 1958, Hull's appointment was terminated and John William Stokes was appointed on secondment from the Northern Territory Police. A media release at the end of October 1958 by the Minister for Territories, Hasluck, commended Hull's 3 years of service on Cocos. Stokes served in the position from the 31st of October 1958 to the 30th of September 1960. His son's boyhood memories and photos of the islands have been published. C.I. Buffett MBE from Norfolk Island succeeded him and served from the 28th of July 1960 to the 30th of June 1966, and later acted as administrator back on Cocos and on Norfolk Island. In 1974, Ken Mullen wrote a small book about his time with wife and son from 1964 to 1966 working at the cable station on Direction Island. In the 1970s, the Australian government's dissatisfaction with the Clunies-Ross feudal style of rule of the island increased. In 1978, Australia forced the family to sell the islands from the sum of $6,250,000, using the threat of compulsory acquisition. By agreement, the family retained ownership of Oceania House, the home on the island. In 1983, the Australian government reneged on this agreement, and told John Clunies-Ross that he should leave the Cocos. The following year, the High Court of Australia ruled that resumption of Oceania House was unlawful, but the Australian government ordered that no government business was to be granted to Clunies-Ross's shipping company, an action that contributed to his bankruptcy. John Clunies-Ross now lives in Perth, Western Australia. However, some members of the Clunies-Ross family still live on the Cocos. Extensive preparations were undertaken by the Government of Australia to prepare the Cocos Malays to vote in the referendum of self-determination. Discussions began in 1982, with the aim of holding the referendum under United Nations supervision. In mid-1983, under guidelines developed by the UN Decolonization Committee, residents were to be offered 3 choices: full independence, free association, or integration with Australia. The last option was preferred by both the islanders and the Australian government. A change in government in Canberra following the March 1983 Australian elections delayed the vote by 1 year. While the Home Island Council stated a preference for a traditional communal consensus vote, the UN insisted on a secret ballot. The referendum was held on the 6th of April 1984, with all 261 eligible islanders participating, including the Clunies-Ross family. 229 voted for integration, 21 for free association, 9 for independence, and 2 failed to indicate a preference. In recent years, a series of disputes have occurred between the Muslim Coco Malay inhabitants and the non-Muslim population of the islands. Government The capital of the territory of Cocos Islands is West Island, while the largest settlement is the village of Bantam. Governance of the islands is based on the Cocos Islands Act 1955 and depends heavily on the laws of Australia. The islands are administered from Canberra by the Attorney General's Department, through a non-resident administrator appointed by the Governor-General. The current administrator is Barry Haas, who was appointed on the 5th of October 2014 and is also the administrator of Christmas Island. These two territories comprise Australia's Indian Ocean territories. The Australian government provides Commonwealth-level government services through the Christmas Island Administration and the Department of Infrastructure and Regional Development. As per the federal government's Territories Law Reform Act 1992, which came into force on the 1st of July 1992, Western Australian laws are applied to the Cocos Islands, so far as they are capable of applying in the territory. Non-application or partial application of such laws is at the discretion of the federal government. The Act also gives Western Australian courts judicial power over the islands. The Cocos Islands remain constitutionally distinct from Western Australia. However, the power of the state to legislate for the territory is power delegated by the federal government. The kind of services typically provided by a state government elsewhere in Australia are provided by departments of the Western Australian government, and by contractors, with the costs met by the federal government. There also exists a unicameral Cocos Islands Shire Council with 7 seats. A full term lasts 4 years, though elections are held every 2 years. Approximately half the members retire each 2 years. Federally, Cocos Islanders form the electorate of Lingiari, with Christmas Island and Outback Northern Territory. Defence and law enforcement. Defence is the responsibility of the Australian Defence Force. There are no active military installations or defence personnel on the islands. The administrator may request the assistance of the Australian Defence Force if required. The 2016 Australian Defence White Paper stated that the airfield in the island would be upgraded to support the RAAF's P8 MPAs. Civilian law enforcement and community policing is provided by the Australian Federal Police. The normal deployment to the island is 1 sergeant and 1 constable. These are augmented by 2 locally engaged special members who have police powers. Courts. Since 1992, court services have been provided by the Western Australian Department of the Attorney General under a service delivery arrangement with the Australian Government. Western Australian court services provide Magistrates Court, District Court, Supreme Court, Family Court, Children's Court, Coroner's Court and Registry for Births, Deaths and Marriages and Change of Name services. Magistrates and judges from Western Australia convene a circuit court as required. Health care. Home Island and West Island have medical clinics providing basic health services, but serious medical conditions and injuries cannot be treated on the island and patients are sent to Perth for treatment. Economy. The population of the islands is approximately 600. There is a small and growing tourist industry focused on water-based and nature activities. Small local gardens and fishing contribute to the food supply, but most food and most other necessities must be imported from Australia or elsewhere. The Cocos Islands Cooperative Society Limited employs construction workers, stevedores, and lighter-age worker operations. Tourism employs others. The unemployment rate was 6.7% in 2011. Strategic importance. The Cocos Islands are geostrategically important because of the proximity to Indian Ocean and South China Sea shipping lanes. The United States Armed Forces have planned to construct air bases on the Cocos Islands, capable of supporting drone-based espionage and surveillance over the South China Sea. Euronews describes described the plan as providing Australian support for increased American presence in Southeast Asia, but likely to upset Chinese officials. James Cogan has written for the World Socialist website that airbase construction at Cocos is one component of Obama's pivot towards Asia, facilitating control of the sea lanes between the Indian and Pacific Oceans and potentially allowing U.S. forces to enforce a blockade against China, after plans to construct air bases were leaked at the Washington Post. The then Australian Defence Minister Stephen Smith stated that the Australian government views Cocos as being potentially a long-term strategic location, but that is down the track. Communications and transport. The Cocos Islands have 15 kilometers of highway. There is one paved airport on the West Island. A tourist bus operates on Home Island. The only airport is Cocos Islands Airport with a single 2,441 meters paved runway. Virgin Australia operates scheduled jet services from Perth Airport via Christmas Island. After 1952, the airport at Cocos Islands was a stop for airline flights between Australia and South Africa, and Qantas and South African Airways stopped there to refuel. The arrival of long-range jet aircraft ended this need in 1967. An inter-island ferry, the Kathabaru P, connects West Homan Direction Islands. There is a lagoon anchorage between Horsburgh and Direction Islands for larger vessels, while yachts have a dedicated anchorage area in the southern lee of Direction Island. There are no major seaports on the islands. Communications. The islands are connected within Australia's telecommunications system. Public phones are located on both West Island and Home Island. A reasonably reliable GSM mobile phone network, run by CIA, operates on Cocos Islands. SIM cards and recharge cards can be purchased from the telecentre on West Island to access this service. Australia Post provides mail services with the postcode 6799. There are post offices on West Island and Home Island. Standard letters and express post items are sent by air twice weekly, but all other mail is sent by sea and can take up to 2 months for delivery. Internet. CC is the Internet Country Code top-level domain for Cocos Islands. It is administered by VeriSign through a subsidiary company ENIC, which promotes it for international registration as the next. CC was originally assigned in October 1997 to ENIC Corporation of Seattle, Washington by the IANA. The Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus also uses the CC domain, along with NCTR. Internet access on Cocos is provided by CIA and is supplied via satellite ground station on West Island, and distributed via a wireless PPPoE-based one on both inhabited islands. Casual internet access is available at the telecentre on West Island, and the Indian Ocean Group Training Office on Home Island. The National Broadband Network announced in early 2012 that it would extend service to Cocos in 2015 via high-speed satellite link. Media. The Cocos Islands have access to a range of modern communication services. Digital television stations have broadcast from Western Australia via satellite. A local radio station, 6CKI, Voice of the Cocos Islands, is staffed by community volunteers and provides some local content. Television. Australian. The Cocos Islands receives a range of digital channels from Western Australia via satellite and is broadcast from the airport building on the West Island on the following VHF frequencies. Malaysian. From 2013 onwards, Cocos Island will receive 4 Malaysian channels via satellite: TV3, NTV7, 8TV and TV9. Education. There is a school in the archipelago, Cocos Islands District High School, with campuses located on West Island, and the other on Home Island. CIDHS is part of the Western Australia Education School. Instruction is in English on both campuses, with Cocos Malay teacher aides assisting the younger children in kindergarten, pre-preparatory and early primary with the English curriculum on the home island campus. The home language of Cocos Malay is valued whilst students engage in learning English. Culture. Gallery. Bibliography